Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to wait another minute or two before we get started just to see if there's anybody else who arrives a little bit past 4. We'll get started soon. Okay, we have a good group of people who've arrived. Thank you so much for joining us today and spending an hour with us. I'd like to welcome Nic Marks, the CEO and founder of Friday Pulse, who's going to be talking to us today about what it takes to build great teams. 30 minutes a week, it's all you need. So I hope that you find it really helpful, really interesting, and have lots of questions, which Nic will be very happy to answer at the end. For any questions that you have, please put them in the Q&A, and then I will read them out to Nic at the end when we have time at the end. If you have any problems with audio or anything like that, just use the raise hand facility, and I will help out with that. Okay, thank you so much, Nic, for joining us today, and welcome everyone. Nic, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Emma. Welcome everybody. And I realized I should have made this a 30-minute webinar. I really should have made to play on the theme of 30 minutes a week, what it takes to build great teams. So firstly, just a bit about me. This is me. I'm a statistician by trade. I'm the CEO and founder of Friday Pulse. And once, quite a long time ago, because you can see I look a little younger, I did a TED talk on my previous work around public policy. Very brief bio. I did maths, statistics and systems thinking at Cambridge and then Lancaster universities. In the 90s, I did lots of quality of life studies. I was a management consultant for a while, trained as a therapist. That's probably one of the reasons I have a sort of slightly quirky view on statistics. And in 2000, I founded what became the Centre for Wellbeing, a London-based think tank called the New Economics Foundation, where we did lots of quite groundbreaking work. In fact, someone wrote to me and said, apparently, I was the person that created the phrase "a well-being economy" in 2002. I didn't know I made it up, but it made sense where we were at New Economics Foundation. And then in the last decade or so, I've done lots of work on creating a happiness at work survey, founded a business, and launched Friday Pulse. So firstly, what is a great team? If I'm going to say building a great team, what is it? And my sort of shorthand definition as a great team is happy and high performing. It's got to be both of those two things for it to be a great team. It's no good being, unhappy and high performing or happy and low performing. And in fact, actually, you can make a quadrant when you've got two variables, effectively happiness and performance. You can make a 2x2. Happy, unhappy, low performing, high performing. And this is where great teams sit in the top right. And clearly this isn't a good space down in the miserable team space. But you've got the quadrant. So you've got what I call slacking teams, if they're happy and low performing. And what I would suggest are burning out teams, which are the unhappy, high performing ones that are they're not sustainable high performance really ultimately, because they are going to lose people, or people are going to get burnt out, and it's going to unravel over time. And when I talk to leaders, they often say happiness. Well, when people work there, they're really worried that if they promote happiness, they're going to get slacking teams. Their problem much more likely to be down here. Probably 3 to 4 times as many people are in that quadrant of burning out teams as they are in slacking teams. So our job at Friday Pulse is really to help organizations build happy and successful teams. So we're trying to push them up into this quadrant. Now, today it's probably fair to say that I'm not going to say so much on the slacking to great teams. I mean, that's, if you've got a happy team and they're not performing well, I think that's other things to do than I have skills in particularly. I mean, obviously I build a business, so I know about being focused and moving performance, but basically what we're talking about is promoting happy teams. And happy teams really do tend to lead to more success. And the way I talk about it is that there are 7 successes of happy teams. They retain staff better, they attract talent, there's less sickness, more creativity, more productive, more resilient, and they generate ultimately business value. So those are the 7 successes of happy teams, and I'm going to refer back to them. But first, I'll just show you a little bit of data on each of them in turn, just to show that this is what happy teams do, and this is why it's worth building happy teams. So let's start with retaining staff. So here is a graph of happiness at the bottom and staff turnover going vertically. Now, actually, the happiness is measured in Q1, and then we see whether people leave in Q2. So it's a very quick effect. And you can see there's a strong gradient on this. So the unhappy, the very unhappy, about 14% of them are leaving in this organization. So the data is from one client of ours, 9,000 people in the client. We were tracking their happiness for a long period, and we could put all the data together and create this graph. And you can see that the very unhappy are about 3 times as likely to leave as the happy, and the unhappy about twice as likely. So it's about twice as likely that people will stay if they're happy or leave if they're unhappy, that way around. So happy teams retain staff better. The next one is that they attract talent. We don't have data within Friday Pulse about this, but there's a very good, very recent, you can see last year paper from George Ward at MIT on workplace happiness and job search behavior. And he basically was working with Indeed. You might be familiar with the jobs board, Indeed.com. And basically what he would do in his experiment with them was he would show them information on a company. This is the normal company page on Indeed. So this is his organization, his university, MIT. You can see that, they're in education, they've got big revenue, they've got more than 10,000 people, founded 1861. And so people can choose to follow, or they can look where their jobs there. So half of the group that he was looking at got this page, the other half got this page. And basically, instead of that information there we had about the company, we've now got their workplace happiness. So what their workplace happiness score is, whether people got a sense of purpose, whether they feel appreciated. So people were given the 2 options. And then they looked, this is across the whole job site, they were doing this. They looked about whether people were more likely to apply for a job. And here's the graph that is in his paper, which is basically showing, so down here, the bottom is, these are happy organizations. Don't know why he's done the graph this way, but he has. So that's scoring over 80, and people were more likely to apply for the job. These are the confidence intervals. You can basically see that if they're unhappy, they're less likely. So it's not the only reason people apply for a job, and people aren't really used to this data, but already you're seeing an impact that happy organizations attract better candidates. So they attract talent. The third one is there's less sickness. Lots of ways this happens. You can see data on stress, burnout, and sickness absence itself. So this is a graph of a cross-section of people who were saying they were unhappy or happy at work, and whether they were highly stressed. Well, unsurprisingly, the ones that are unhappy are more stressed. Not much difference between the happy and the very happy, by the way. Burnout, very steep gradient. The unhappy are much more likely to burn out. So those burning out teams that I showed you earlier, these are going to be in these sort of groups over here. So these percentage of people are saying they've definitely experienced burnout in the last 12 months. And here, days off sick. So pretty flat amongst those, but the unhappy, quite a few days off sick there too. In fact, you can see that. I mean, this is about the UK average. The UK average is about 4 days a year that you have off sick. So you can see that those are even okay, having a couple of days more off sick than the UK average. And if they're very unhappy, many more. So you're losing days that way. So happy teams have less sickness. The fourth one, they're more creative. creativity is tricky to measure. So I'm going to use an experiment, a lab experiment, to illustrate this point. So this is an experiment. It's called the Dunker candle experiment. If you've heard me before, some of you might have heard me speak about this. But basically, in the experiment, people are given some matches, a box of tacks, and a candle, and they're asked to attach the candle to the wall in such a way that when you light it, the wax doesn't drip on the floor. It's a sort of mind mess, and you have to do lateral thinking and effectively notice that there is a box as well as the tacks. So you can empty the tacks, you can attach the box to the wall and put the candle in it and solve it. Some people solve it, some don't. But what they did with this was they had a control group, they did nothing. They had a group that they agitated into a negative mood, which they might use music or videos or whatever, discordant music, fearful videos, whatever. And they put some into a positive mood. Maybe they're playing them lovely music, cats playing, babies gurgling, babies screaming, maybe in the negative mood. Anyway, they're using different ways to do that. How many people solved it? So in the control group, 13% of people solved the Dunker candle experiment in, I think it was 10 minutes. People who are agitated into a negative mood, 20% of them solved it. It's kind of interesting. And actually a negative mood, more people did. But when we're in a negative mood, it's not negative as in dysfunctional. We've got energy because we need to deal with a threat. We think we need to deal with a threat. So we are slightly more energized, and perhaps that helps. But then the people that are put into a positive mood, 75% of them solved it. 75%. It's a huge difference, you know. And this is one of the reasons that positivity is really important at work, because we can see how things fit together more. And often at work, we're trying to solve problems. You know, the Dunker candle experiment is a problem-solving experiment. So people are solving it much better when they're feeling positive. So happy teams are more creative. Fifth one, they're more productive. We can look at productivity in many ways. This is probably my favorite, and also probably the best paper out there on the causal link between happiness and productivity. So it's authored by Clement Bellet, who I don't know, but Jean-Emmanuel Deneve, I do know. He is professor at Oxford University, the business school there, and George Ward, who did the other paper, who's at MIT. And they've been working on this paper, wait for it, for 7 years. And the reason is that causality is very difficult to show and prove. And they've really had to unpick the data to get to that. But it has, this one here is an earlier version. They just reproduced a paper. It's the same data, it's just they're unpicking this causal root very much. But the long and the short of it is that they were looking at happiness of call operators at 11 BT call centers across the UK. 90% of the time, there were inbound calls to these call operators. So there was no prospecting in the sales team. They're just sitting, waiting for a call to come. And they measured happiness weekly. So they were looking at the relationship between the mood and the sales that they did. I'm not going to go into how they proved causality. Well, it was through the weather, actually. So it's really important. They had different sites because they could look at the weather on different days. Basically, the weather made people a bit happier and they sold more. The causality can't run the other way. Selling more could make you happy, but being happy couldn't make the sun shine. So we know the causal link is going this way. And what they basically showed was that the happy operators were selling more because they were very closely monitoring how many people calls they did and how many they sales. So they were doing 13% more sales than the unhappy operators. This was also an effect through time because they could track people through time because they're measuring weekly. And they actually showed that if people, in the weeks they were very unhappy, they were selling much less than the weeks when they were happy. That's the difference between them. So basically, they've shown that not only do happier operators sell more than unhappy ones, but people who were previous in weeks that they are unhappy, they sell less than weeks that they are happy. So this is internally through time also holds very, very strong effect. So if they became happier, they would sell more. And that's really what we want to know. So they're more productive. There's lots of other data out there. I'll glimpse on one a bit later, again, in the webinar in a minute, but there's lots of papers out there. They all show that what they harder to do is show the pure causality. Some of it's correlational, but that's a very strong result from Jean-Emmanuel Denis. So they're more productive. Number 6 is that they're more resilient. And again, resilience is difficult to measure. You know, you can ask people, do you feel resilient or do you bounce back from setbacks? But the best thing to do is actually observe that happening as it happens through time. So do you remember the pandemic? How can we forget the pandemic? It was a very difficult year, you know, and I sometimes say to people, put this graph up here. This graph is of changes in weekly happiness. This is time, January 2020 through to just before Christmas. And these waves they're different types of workers, but basically they're all experiencing this huge drop in March into April 2020. And then eat out to help out summer, got a bit better, never quite back to where we were before, and then drops off as we hit into more lockdowns, more restrictions at the end of the year. And this is a measure of weekly happiness. And so in a way, if you think of resilience, resilience is the ability to bounce back after a setback. So collectively, here's a huge setback, and there is some resilience in the system. We start getting back towards where we were, dropping off again, but notice we never quite get back to where we are. But that's one classic way of thinking about resilience, is bounce back. Now, so it just says it was a difficult year. The source of this, by the way, is YouGov, the weekly mood of the nation. You can click on that. The data is all available there. And it was first reported as graph in the World Happiness Report in 2021. Now, you can take that data. So this data is basically lots of different types, you know, of workers. But I can take this data. This is just for white collars. This is the same data. It's not quite as smooth, but that's the drop. That's the eat out to help out. That's the drop in the autumn. And then actually goes on further in time. That's a peak for Christmas. Although we only allowed to meet with 6 people then in the UK, there's still people feel happier. You know, they were mixing with their family, but no, they're not even back to where they were in January. So it's not as if it's a peak, but it's not exactly joy. And then, you know, this was the lockdowns in January and February, and then slowly back, but still below where people were before. Now, our Friday Pulse clients, we were also asking how happy they were every week. And so I overlay our data on this. So this is overlaying the Friday Pulse clients data on it. Now I've rebased the data. So I've just gone, what were we in January 2020? In fact, for both of them, I've taken the 6-month average beforehand to get that base point. And then, you know, our data goes like this. So you can see our clients had a similar setback in March. And then, woo, they didn't have them here. Still a bit lower than they were before. Still got that Christmas peak there. So what you can, if you look at this data, you can see a couple of things. One is that the COVID disruption, our clients dropped 18%, whereas the UK dropped 33% in reported levels of happiness. Another thing you can see is that the sort of a line of getting back to 90% of where you were before, it took our clients 3 weeks to get back there, whereas it took the UK 13 weeks. So if bounce back is getting back to where you were before or towards it, but much quicker. But then you've got this whole here. So there's another way of thinking about resilience, which is not bouncing back, but is absorption of the shock. So basically, if you think of a ball hitting a wall, the wall is resilient and the ball just bounces off, but the ball is also resilient. It absorbs the shock and bounces back, but the wall just absorbs the shock, doesn't move. So this is the other way of thinking about resilience, is that actually there's a shock going on, but you just cope with it. And so this is really strong evidence that our clients are more resilient than the UK population because they absorb these shocks. Yes, they were lower, they were 4% lower than they were before, whereas the whole UK, if you took the whole average, is 14% lower. So that's quite more resilient than this one. Now, I guess I'm saying happier teams are. Well, we know we have a question. We ask, how happy were you at work this week? And we index it 0, 25, 50, 75, 100. So when we look at our clients, you know, we can compare the same score, and basically the UK average for that is 66 and our average is 71. So strong evidence that our clients are happier than the UK, you'd expect them to be, and that actually that happiness is helping them be more resilient. So resilience is the shape of the curve rather than a construct itself. It's, you see it emerging in the shape of the curve, the ability to bounce back or absorb shocks. So happy teams are more resilient. They also generate business value. Till recently, I've mainly used data from Glassdoor. You probably know them, they're the job site. Their research unit was also inspired by earlier work from Alex Edmonds, who's a professor at London Business School. And basically what they're doing here is this is tracking the portfolio value of the S&P 500. I think it's rebased to start at 1,000, and then how did that do through the 4 or 5 years from 2008 to 2014. So that's what the S&P, just taking the end of the year things and end of the year values. And then they looked at organizations who were in the best places to work, and this was their shape of curve. And you can see there's a huge gap by the end of the study. So there, that's risen to what, approximately $2,000 from 1,000, whereas it's right up at sort of over 3.5. So sort of 50% extra share price growth, or double share price growth, actually, if that's one, that's gone up 1,000, that's gone up 2,000. So very big, it's sort of 3-5% every year compounded up. And very recently, well, a forthcoming paper coming out, which I've seen presented, showed this graph. It's so rubbish, my image of it, because I've literally taken it off an online stream at this webinar I was on. It's getting released, John Emmanuel tells me, at the end of this month, so I'll have a better version soon. But this top line is the score of the share price of organizations that have good happiness at work scores. It's again using the Indeed data that George Ward and John Emmanuel Deneve collaborate a lot. The other ones are things like the S&P 500, the NASDAQ 100, the Dow Jones, and you can see they're all lower. So again, there's strong evidence that organizations that have happy cultures are actually turning that into greater share price value. And that is sort of almost the ultimate indicator. And they're also going to present some data, which I've only just seen again in this webinar, but looking at the relationship between happiness here and things like firm value, return on assets and profits. And they're showing these correlation lines all the way through. I haven't totally unpicked this because I haven't read the paper yet. But again, it looks like very strong evidence that, you know, that organizations that are investing in happiness and well-being are doing better. So they generate business value. And so we've got these 7 successes. So it's really worth building happy teams because they're going to be more successful. There's also a feedback loop here, which is that success leads to happiness. And there's good evidence from a paper by a guy called Jim Harter, who's from Gallup, where he's looking at the relationship between happiness, team happiness. These are business units, they're teams. Some of the business units probably have about 100 people in them, some of them less. But basically, they're then looking at how their financial performance and their happiness are related. They're entwined, is what the paper's going to show. And effectively, what they were looking at was, you know, does happiness lead to success? Does success lead to happiness? And what they found was that happiness led to success and success led to happiness. They went both ways. They were looking at them like 6 months apart. But notice the team happiness was twice as strong a correlation coefficient. So what you've really got here is like a cycle of happiness leading to financial success, leading back to happiness like this. And so they're entwined. And so that's what this arrow is here. So happiness leading to success going round. So they're really worth building. Happiness and success go together. Great teams are happy and successful. The question is, how do you build them? And, I say 30 minutes a week to build them. It's obviously more you're going to do, but this is the foundation of creating a happy, successful team. And it's an investment of time. So we need to make sure it's a wise investment of time. So the happy teams, you know, they lead to the successes, but what leads to the happy teams? Well, this is the 30 minutes a week. And the way at Friday Pulse, we operationalize this is we have a methodology we call measure, meet, repeat. And I'm going to step through that and particularly what the meeting needs to look like. But one thing we often get, when we're talking with team leaders or organizations is, well, we haven't got time to do a meeting for every week. And in a way, they're right. There's so much pressure around. UK has some of the biggest time pressure, in Europe, across Europe anyway. 52% of managers report having very high levels of time pressure. 30% of managers in the UK work an extra day a week, effectively. A lot of talk about 4-day weeks. I'm a big fan of them, but 5-day weeks would be good for a lot of people. The manager's working day has been extended by about an hour since the beginning of COVID. I actually haven't seen data from this year, but that was certainly true up to last year. And unhappy teams also add time pressure to team leaders, in the sense if your team's unhappy and they're whinging, they're going to lead on you more. So in a way, if you can invest time ahead, then you can prevent unhappiness and you can actually free up time. And this is really the whole point of why you need to be on it every week. So you've got to get the most from this team meeting for it to work, if it's going to really, really work. Now, this is a little bit of a philosophical interlude, but all of time is not equal. It's a bit strange, but actually, I love the ancient Greeks, and they've always got a god for everything, but they've got 3 gods of time or for time. They've got Chronos here. So here he's depicted with an hourglass. This is our typical view of linear time going through. Chronological comes from it. They have a god called Aeon. And you can see here that I'm afraid it is a he. I think this one should be a goddess, to be honest, because this is cyclical, rhythmic time. This is the time of nature, the time of the moon, the time of days and nights, the repeating pattern. Then they had a 3rd god of time who's called Kairos. And this is an image I found of Kairos, and he's got wings, and he's the one that puts things into action in time, because you can have half an hour and do nothing, or you can have half an hour and be really intensely productive. And so Kairos is the god of like seizing the opportunity of time. So this is the way they sort of go. Chronos is chronological time. So think of it as the length of a day. Aeon, I don't know I know the word eon comes from it, is cyclical time. So that's the repeating patterns of days. And Kairos is opportune time. It's basically seize the day. So the length of a day, the repeating patterns, and seize the day. Do you make the most of the day? And if we're going to have team meetings, they're 30 minutes, we've got to make sure it ticks all of these in a way. So the 30 minutes is the Chronos, the Aeon is just repeated every week. And the Kairos is it a worthwhile use of time? Is this really going to work for us? So we need all of these going on. So 30 minutes a week, getting the most from it. So I talk about measure, meet, repeat, but this way they're presented a bit linearly. They're cyclical. They are the Aeon, if that's how you say it, the Eon, cyclical way of time. Measure, meet, repeat, go around. It's a repeating pattern. So the measure, we ask people, how happy were you at work this week? Simple 2-minute check-in, captures successes and frustrations and tracks changes in team happiness. So it's a pulse check on Fridays. That's why we call Friday Pulse. This is actually a screenshot of the question. How happy were you at work last week? From you answer from very happy, very unhappy to very happy. We then ask you to share whether things have gone well, what's gone well. So you could click on this and celebrate a success. You can thank a colleague, send them a note, say thank you for your support. You can suggest an idea to improve things, or you can share a frustration, something that isn't going right. So this is basically friction and flow. You need to tackle these quickly. You need to build on these. And then we just finally answer with a fun question. This is a typical one we use. Would you rather perfect a musical instrument or win an Olympic medal? People answer as they do. They change every week, this one. So these 2 questions stay the same. You always want to track the same data every week so you can compare it. These are basically, although you're writing text here, so actually, you're going to change your answers here a lot. And then here is just a bit of fun. So then that measure flows into the meet. And this is your 25-minute start the meet weekly meeting. So that I say 25 meetings because 25 minutes is the new half hour. You need to leave people time to move between, get up and stretch, whatever it is. So have meetings which are 25 minutes or 55 minutes. So there's a little change over time. So the idea of this meeting, this is the crucial part. This is the real part of the investment of the half an hour, because this is 25 minutes of it. It helps the team and the team leader know how everybody is doing. Celebrate and build on positives. Understand and tackle any frustrations that are going on. Friday Pulse, if you use Friday Pulse, it will automatically generate a slide deck to do this. But you could do this without Friday Pulse. Just have a meeting where you ask people, how are you doing? What's gone well? What hasn't? It's the same principle. So the slide deck I'm going to talk you through just a little bit, which is that the slide number 1 will show you what the response rate is. And why do we show that? Because it shows the reliability of the data. And the idea is to encourage everyone to participate. Slide 2 is going to be the answer to the fun question. And the idea here is to get a positive start to the meeting. If you remember that data on the creativity, that the people in a good mood were able to solve problems better. If there were things to solve later in the team meeting, this is starting to create the right positive atmosphere for that to happen. It's also just fun. Slide 3 is going to be the time trend for your team. Yeah, so this team's had a setback, they're coming back. It basically helps everybody understand, gets them on the same page about what's going on in the room. Then you get into what's going well. So these are the little cards. So they're very small, but they're just basically cards of people saying, this is what's gone well for me, or they're thanking people here. And so this is the find out what's going well and build on it part of the team meeting. And then the last one is about ideas or frustrations, things that need to be fixed. You're identifying opportunities for improvement here. Now, this ordering is really important. So you go back here, you basically, is the data valid? Let's start the meeting in a good mood. Just check out how last week was. Do the positives first, then tackle the frustrations. If we started with the frustrations, you'd have a very different team meeting, So starting with the positives gets people in the framework that they can collaborate and work well together. And that is the nub of it, really, of the 30 minutes is spending this time building on the positives and tackling frustrations every week. Friction and flow, hygiene. As I said, it helps everyone know what they're doing, celebrate, build on the positives, understand, tackle frustrations. After that, it's repeat. It's repeat, go around again. And this builds over time. So this is actually what one team's real data using Friday Pulse. And over 6 months, the team leader has taken them from being an unhappy team right up to being in the right space, the green space up over here. And that is the building of a happy and successful team over time, just playing out there. It doesn't happen overnight. You can't suddenly go from being unhappy to happy. I mean, you can have unhappy weeks, but this team had been resolutely unhappy for quite a while before. We don't have the scores before because they just knew it was an unhappy team. They started using Friday Pulse on this date and tracking it. So 30 minutes a week to build a happy team. And then you're likely to unlock the 7 successes that you'll get. But can we calculate a return on that investment? Can we show that that really works? Well, let's take this 10-person team as a sort of example. They've gone from being unhappy to happy. So what would we expect to happen if a team moved from unhappy to happy? Well, we expect these things to start improving. And I'm only going to draw on data from these 3, estimate from these 3. So we're not going to use all 7. I'm going to look at the return from retaining staff, from less sickness and more productivity. The others will also be there and probably make this even more, but we'll work with these 3 because I can create data on them. So this is for staff turnover. So if we assume that a rate for this team drops from 20% to 10%, so it halves. So that, as I showed you when I was looking at the data earlier, is very reasonable. We see that unhappy people are twice as likely to leave as happy people. Well, for 10 people, a 10% staff turnover means that there's one person joining, 20% mean 2. So basically, you've got 1 less recruitment process per year. Typically, a recruitment process costs 30% of annual salary of 1 person. So effectively, it's about, because there's 10 people in this team, it's about 3% of the total team costs that will save. 3% of the total team costs for dropping retention rate. There's also reduced stress on the team, which I'm not measuring. So that's from staff turnover, 3% of total costs. Let's look at sickness abstinence. Right, well, assume it drops from that 5 days I showed you to 3 days a year. So that's 2 extra working days per year. There's about 220 working days in a year. So that's about 1% extra of team total cost, because you've got 2 extra days per person. It's about 1% of their days working. So that's 1% of team costs you're saving there. What about productivity? Productivity is really difficult to measure often. You know, it was a 12% increase in sales in that BT study, but it changes a lot by role to role and sectors. So productivity gains from happiness are higher for roles that require collaboration, creativity, and direct customer client contact. They're going to be higher for that. And the increase ranges from 10% to way above 30%, but I'm just going to take the 10% for now. That's going to increase by 10%. Still really decent improvement. But the benefit then would be 10% of total team costs, because effectively everybody is improving their performance by 10%. So sort of like having an extra team member. So if you look at these together, the returns are 3% for retention, 1% and 10%. So 14% of team costs is a really reasonable prediction of how taking a team from being unhappy up to happy is going to improve it. Well, what's the investment? Well, the investment is half an hour a week. There'll be other things going on, but happiness is so much more about how you work, not doing more work. So, you know, it's much more about, you know, having, you know, better one-to-ones rather than more with your teams, having better team meetings. But you take this half-hour meeting, it's half an hour of a week, another 35-hour week. That rather conveniently works out 1.4% of total team time. So effectively, you're getting a 14% return on a 1.4 return. So it's a 10-time return on investment, roughly. Now, you could argue that you wouldn't get all of that productivity gain. Okay, you get half of it. Well, it's going to be a 6 times. Maybe you could argue that actually it would take a bit more time. Well, you know, okay, maybe it takes an hour a week, so it's a 5 times. But you can see there's so much slack in this return investment that's just massive. And actually, I took the lowest productivity gain, you know, estimate there. So the upside is absolutely massive of this, you know, and it's about how we work together, and having that ritual of that weekly, that 30-minute team meeting really, really helps. So to summarize, great teams are happy and successful. There are 7 successes of happy teams, you know, retention, talent attraction, less sickness, creativity, productivity, resilience, adding business value. The investment to building a happy team is time, and particularly well-used time, worthwhile use of time. So, you know, sitting down with your team, having that conversation, you know, the measure, meet, repeat conversation. And the 3 Greek gods can remind us of that: Kronos, Aeon, and Kairos. I don't know if curiosity comes from Kairos. Maybe it does. Don't know. But the Kronos is the time. It's ticking away. And of course, in an organization, time is money. It's people's wages. That's the thing. So Kronos most aligns with that. Aeon is the weekly pattern, and Kairos is effectively engagement in lots of ways, or seizing a day, making the best use of that time. Measure, meet, repeat is just a really simple, easy to do process that can make sure everyone's on the same page, that you get into a pattern. Any of you that run a business or run a team know that rhythms are really important to how we work. The team meeting is absolutely critical to this, and running a good team meeting, starting with those positives, so that when you tackle anything, you've got the right atmosphere there to do it. And Friday Pulse can help, and it only takes 30 minutes a week to do. And there is a sort of 10 times return on investment there, I'm pretty sure. So that's really a summary of the webinar, and be very happy to open it up to questions now.
Thank you so much, Nic. Yeah, does anybody have questions that they'd like to add to the Q&A? Or if you would prefer, you can raise a hand and I can give you permission, which makes me feel very powerful, to speak and actually say, you know, ask the question directly to Nic or say something. Politely, of course, we don't. So yeah, does anybody have any questions to add to the Q&A before I start? Or want to raise a hand? Okay, so one of the questions that we have is, you mentioned resilience, Nic, towards the beginning of the presentation. What is it that builds resilience in teams? What gives teams resilience?
So resilience is, as I say, the ability to either absorb a shock or bounce back from it. So in teams, and our focus is very much teams because we work together, it's a lot about the strength of relationships, the trust that you have with your colleagues, that resilience is built from. So the reason we work in teams is because when we collaborate, we tend to come up with better ideas. We can absorb things. So if something happens, if you have a high trust situation, you have what Amy Edmondson would call psychological safety, that people then can work well to fix a problem. So what happened, say, at the beginning of COVID, people had to suddenly go and work from home. There had to be a huge amount of reorganization. And in organizations that were strong, those happen much better than those organizations that weren't. So relationships are critical to it. So the ability to think broadly, in Barbara Fredrickson's theory of positive emotions, she shows that positivity helps us have a broader perspective. That was going on at the Dunker Candle experiment too. So all of these ways, so better problem solving, better relationships, are all involved in that resilience there. And how you build it, I think, is like trust, you're building it slowly. You have to show that resilience is an outcome of having a high trust, positive team, really.
Okay, so resilience is one of the outcomes as you're building those happier teams. That happy culture is one of the benefits.
Yeah, it is. And I sometimes find myself not annoyed, but people sort of say, oh, we want to build resilient employees, like they can just throw stuff at them and they'll be resilient and that'll be all fine. I think it comes from building better teams, and also, obviously organizations should not be throwing stuff at people. Yeah. But that seems to be the Elon Musk approach to resilience, is that whoever's left standing at the end must be resilient. I'm not very keen on that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So next question from Annabelle. Thank you for sharing that, Annabelle, who says, we already use it and it's great. Thank you. Do you have any tips for creative ways to approach the meat part of that process?
So I think less creative and more prosaic in some ways, which is that if we're going to use my Greek god analogy of Aeon, I don't think that's how you say his name, Aeon, I don't know. It should be a woman. I'm really annoyed it's not a woman, though. The Greeks they had lots of brilliance, but there's some pretty dodgy things too. Anyway, it's that sort of persistence and consistency, I think, to the team meeting. So having it at the same time every week, making it part of your team culture, that you do talk about this every week. And it doesn't, I say 25 minutes. I know some clients that do 10, 15, and then if they need longer, they suddenly have it. I know that we as a team, we pretty much always meet for half an hour, sometimes longer, but we do a lot of chit chat. And also, but that's good. The chit chat is good, isn't it, Emma? We don't see each other so often, probably a couple of times a month physically, but we're seeing each other online, and that's good. We get to know each other better, and our quirks and things, and that's kind of what builds the strength of relationship. So I think consistency is the most important thing for the team meetings. We absolutely know that our clients that just track happiness and don't do the meeting tail away, that their response rates are going to go down, because why should people respond on a Friday if you're not going to talk about it and deal with any issues that come up? So it's really an important thing to make it part of the culture, is what I would say, and be consistent. And then if you're doing it systematically through an organization, it is sort of calling to account the participation in it. So it's very important to support team leaders. They're under a lot of pressure. Very many of them are what the Chartered Management Institute called accidental managers. They've been promoting for technical skills, not people skills. Friday Pulse, we really try and help them build their people skills by giving them data every week so they can learn, and we guide them with the slide deck to do that. So that's the way we do it. I mean, other little tips that we do is that, you know, well, you know this well because we do it together, but I always get people to read out their own successes. Other team members might ask them about it. The thank yous, we get them to read aloud, and the thank yous are really lovely because the person being thanked, it's nice too. The person giving the thanks is nice too, and everyone else notices the niceness. So it's very resonant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we sometimes take turns, so different people will run the meeting, which we also recommend to clients, and that often works really well because you get a different approach. Depending who's running the meeting, they'll have different types of questions, different way of doing it. And so everybody feels involved. Everybody kind of knows that at some point they might run that meeting, and so they pay more attention just on that, you know, fundamental level. And it's just, yeah, you get a really different approach from different types of people who are in the team. So that's just a small way to make it interesting.
Yeah.
Next question from Nuno. Thank you for sharing a question. How do you suggest balancing personal situations of unhappiness or sadness within this process?
So we are all going to bring that. There's not a perfect boundary between life and work. You know, people bring their unhappiness and happiness indeed to work, you know, and vice versa. I mean, a lot of organizations export unhappiness back into the family. So statistically, it's called I've forgotten what it's called. It's called something. It's basically how when it moves between domains, but I've forgotten the name. That normally comes straight out, that word. Senior moment there, but basically it's the sort of bleeding between different domains, and that's really annoying me. I can't remember the name. But basically, if people are something's going wrong at home or outside of life, then clearly it's going to impact their work. But the way to help that impact it less is to name it. You know, nearly every time is talking about something helps people set it aside more. So, you know, and clearly if someone's work suddenly, who's been a great worker, you know, great team player, and suddenly things aren't right and it's not to do with work, then, you know, give them some slack, because these are, you know, we all have setbacks in life, and actually if you can support people through a setback, they're going to come back feeling fantastic. You know, I mean, you know, I've had over the years, you know, employees who've needed to take a break, you know, and then if you look after them, when they come back, they feel even more committed to what you're doing. So it's helping accommodate that. Clearly having good friends at work, they don't necessarily have to be in your team. They could be elsewhere in the organization. Someone you can talk to is really important. You know, Gallup have always used this rather American worded question: do you have a best friend at work? We say, do you have good friends at work? Friendships are really important at work, you know. So it's those very human things around that, and helping people contain it. Sometimes work is an escape from unhappiness. I mean, I've had that in my life where my private life wasn't great and work was good, and actually that made me stronger to tackle the things I needed to do in my own life. So there's lots of ways these things interact. And actually one of the reasons why I got very interested in promoting happiness at work is it's a way of reaching regular people in their daily lives. You know, when I worked in government policy, it was quite hard to reach them. So actually one of the things I love about Friday Pulse is it just really gets into our everyday lives, and work is part of that.
Yeah, and I think in some organizations, that 20-minute meeting each week is maybe the first time they've ever had a moment where they could share something that is difficult for them or that they're frustrated with. So this is a new opportunity to share something. And then at first people might be hesitant because it's new. And then they get into as you do it week on week, hopefully people feel safer to share. And that's the psychological safety, isn't it, that you mentioned?
Yeah. And it's about respecting people and not judging them, and making and if you're a team leader, sharing your own vulnerability about things. So so, you know, like during the lockdowns, well, actually this is before you joined, but it was quite a difficult time, and I was getting stressed, and I said to him, I'm going to take a day off a week because I just need to rebalance a bit. And then 6 weeks later, we decided to become a 4-day-a-week company because it just seemed it was a really good way for all of us regulating the challenges that were going on, and we haven't looked back from that ever since. So
Yes, if anybody has questions about 4-day-a-week companies, please do let us know or send us an email, because we would love to share how well it works for us and why it's
it'd be great, Emma, if you asked the feedback question now.
Yeah, if everybody has 2 seconds, we'd love to hear to answer this poll, and tell us, would you recommend our webinars to colleagues, other organizations? Be great to have your feedback, and then we can keep working on improving them and sharing.
Yeah, we track them every time, because I try and create original material for every webinar, and it's interesting to know what works for people and what doesn't. So I'm actually exceptionally open to feedback, because communicating these ideas is a big part of my role.
Yeah, and it really helps us to hear the questions that you have, so that we can really think about how we can answer those questions for you clearly. Okay, I'm going to end that now. Does anybody have a last poll answer that they want to add? Okay, end it now. And I think we have one last question. So Martin's asked about, do we work more hours in the 4 days when we do the 4-day week?
No, we do not. So I made it a pure 4-day week. And I mean, obviously all of us sometimes work extra. That's just part of it. But as I said, I showed that data that 30% of UK managers work an extra day a week, but basically work 6 days a week. They work 7.5 hours overtime. You just actually bringing it down to 4 is sensible. I mean, sometimes, I know that, your colleague Angela takes Fridays off, but I know I often get an email from a Friday morning, but then she's certainly finishing by 11. I know she goes volunteering sometimes. So, there's lots of things that people do with that. And I think it's really about just being more focused when we're at work. We've streamlined meetings a bit. This half-hour meeting is a core one to us, because it's where we set and we rebalance. We have half the team working Monday to Thursday, half the team Tuesday to Friday, is the way that we do it.
Yeah, and I think whenever we work slightly past, so we do 9 to 5, whenever we work slightly more than that, that would be no more than in any job where you're working 5 days a week. And people who do sometimes work a bit past the work hours, is partly that's how they're managing their work, and partly how their job works. But it's never more than you would have in any normal job. I think we don't work over our hours very often or very much. But the 4 days seems to work. This is the first time I've worked for a 4-day-a-week company, and it's just been amazing. I genuinely feel like I get more done working 4 days a week than I did working 5 days a week. It's not had any impact on that from I think that's probably the most general concern.
Yeah, I think I'm probably the most rubbish actually. But I actually, it takes the whole pressure off the week, in the sense that, I do tend to work all 5 days, but I often work a short day, or if I suddenly, don't. Yeah, so I'm probably the worst at doing it.
I think you get energy from your work, don't you, Nick? So
yeah, and also sometimes my work is mulling ideas, and that's actually quite good at a sort of slower pace. That's good. Yeah.
Does anybody have any other questions they'd like to ask? We will absolutely be sending out the recording after this, probably tomorrow. And yeah, any of the free webinars that we offer, we'll always send out the recording. So if you can't make it, please do sign up anyway. And if you have any questions, please do email us at help@fridaypulse.com. We'd love to know. Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much indeed, everybody. And have a great rest of your week.
Bye.